We begin today's shiur 6 lines from the top. The Gemara opens with a quote from the Mishnah. It said, "V'ein ein yorshav shel zeh v'yorshav shel zeh yorshin ksubasa." Once again, we're dealing with a woman whose husband had gone abroad, and word came to her through a witness, a singular witness, that he's dead. She went and married a second husband. The original fellow comes back, and we say that she has to leave both of them, and the details of the Mishnah we have already learned, and we're focusing on them in the during our previous year as well. So amongst the different details is that the heirs of the first husband and of the second husband, neither group inherits her ksuba. The Gemara asks, Ksuba, my avidita, what is the discussion concerning Ksuba doing here in the first place, when we already said in the Reisha of the Mishnah that this woman does not deserve a Ksuba. She doesn't receive a Ksuba. Ksuba, of course, is the financial marriage guarantee that a woman receives upon getting married. That in the event she is divorced or widowed, she receives payment. But we've already said that this woman, who retroactively we see behaved wrongfully by marrying the second husband, basically a married woman entering marriage with a second man, so we already said she loses the ksuba. So what is the point of the Mishnah telling us that the heirs of both husbands, neither one receives her ksuba? There was no ksuba due to this woman in the first place. The Gemara answers, Omar Rav Papa, Ksubas Bonin Dikrin. This is a special rabbinic institution that is featured extensively in Maseches Ksubas. In order to appreciate what Ksubas Bonin Dikrin means, literally the ksuba of the male children, male sons. In order to appreciate that, the best way to approach it is simply by going through the Rashi, who gives us all the background, and eventually we'll hopefully understand what the Mishnah meant when it said that the heirs of both men do not receive her ksuba. So we look at the Rashi, in the upper part of the narrow lines, Ksubas bonin dikrin, Disnan b'ksubas, in Maseches Ksubas it says, Ksubas bonin dikrin. Bonin dikrin dihavyon lichi minoi. This is a text that's written into the ksuba. A man, upon marrying a woman, writes that the male children that we produce together, inun yarsin kesef ksubasech yeser al chulkehon diim achuhon. This man who's marrying the woman, he may very well have children from a previous marriage, or he may marry another woman and have children from them. He tells the wife that he's marrying right now that the male children that we produce, they will be the beneficiaries of the property that you bring into our marriage. That's part of the ksuba, and we'll see mechanically how that operates as we go on. So the man guarantees this woman that the children that we have together, the sons that we have, they are going to inherit your ksuba as a separate unit of inheritance beyond my personal properties that are distributed equally amongst all of my children. V'im meisa b'chayav, if that woman dies in the husband's lifetime, v'nosa shnia v'yolda lo, and then the man marries a second wife, and she has children, umeis hu, and then the husband dies. So at this point, you have a father of 2 sets of children that's dying, and the second wife, though, she remains alive. B'nei shnia afilu hein nekevos, the children of the second wife, even if they are females, notlin ksubas imon kechov gomor, they inherit their mother's ksuba as a basic debt to them. And that's what we call ikra din. That's not a takona. That's not a rabbinic innovation. Sharei nis almino me'avihen. She, their mother, became a widow, and as becoming a widow, so the ksuba, the financial guarantees that are provided for that woman, are paid to her as a basic debt. And when she dies, her children they're inheriting their mother. The father's already died. Their mother gets property. When she dies, her children inherit her. Uvenei Rishona, the children of the first wife. Im yesh zechorim, if there are males. Dikrin was the word in the Gemara. The dalet of that word dikrin can be interchanged with a zayin, so you have zechorim. So if there are male children from the first marriage, noitlin ksubas imon, they will inherit their mother's ksuba. Bear in mind, their mother died in their father's lifetime. V'afal gav de meisa b'chayav, even though she died while the father was still alive. And at that point, by Torah law, the husband inherits the wife. Whatever properties she brought into the marriage and were written into the ksuba, the father inherits that. And when the father inherits properties, his properties eventually upon his death ought to be or should be distributed equally amongst all of his children. However, the Rabbanon Tikkun, the Rabbanon instituted Ksubas Bonin Dikrin, a special, we'll say a contingency, that though the father inherited this woman, their mother, we're talking about the children of the first wife, though their father inherited the mother, the property that she had brought into the marriage and that he had assigned to her, the ksuba that was earmarked for her, they alone will inherit that. And why is that? Why is it so important that the specific children of that woman inherit the money that was assigned to her, that she brought into the marriage, and that was written into the ksuba? So that her father will be motivated to dedicate toward her marriage money as if it were his son. And what's the motivating factor? A father, knowing that whatever he assigns to his daughter, when the Rashi makes reference, Yitain Levito Kivno, a son inherits the father. That's standard Torah law. Daughters, when there are sons, daughters by Torah law don't inherit their father when in the presence of sons of their brothers. However, the rabbis want to motivate fathers to give to their daughters and upon their marriage. And what will motivate a man to do that is knowing that his properties will eventually land up not distributed amongst some other lady's children, but amongst his own grandchildren. That's Ksubas Bonin Dikrin. I hope it's not too complicated. If it sounds that way, so listen to this section again, go over the Rashi. However, we have to tie this issue into our story. V'hacha lo shakli yorshin dilok subas bonin dikrin. In the case of the woman that was originally married properly to Mr. 1, but he went abroad and a witness came and said that he died, she then went ahead and married Mr. 2, and the first husband shows up. We say that the children of this man will not receive the ksuba. V'hacha lo shakli yorshin dila ksubas bonin dikrin elo b'nei hakshera notlin ksubas iman. v'ashar cholkin b'shaveh. As far as the woman's ksubas bonin dikrin, that is money that that was guaranteed toward her ksuba, whether it be from the first husband or the second husband, the children that she has with those husbands respectively will not be inheriting her ksuba other than the children that she had under kosher circumstances. In other words, before she married the second husband. However, any children that she has from the second husband, or possibly from the first husband that takes her back wrongfully after he returned, those children will not receive the ksuba that was assigned to their mother. And that's the intention of the Mishnah when it says that Ein Yorshin Shalzev, Ein Yorshin Shalzev, Yorshin Subasa. The Gemara continues, and we're reading at the end of the line in the Gemara, Pshita, is that not obvious? So the Gemara says, Mahu de Tema, I might have thought, the Didah, the Avda Isura Konsura Bonan. The woman herself that did something wrong, she married the second man when her first husband in fact was alive, so she did something wrong, so we understand all of the points of loss that she must experience as stated in the Mishnah. Lizara lo konsu rabbanan, but her children, they didn't do something wrong, so maybe they shouldn't lose out. Komash Malon, so that's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that they too lose out. The two husbands that we featured in our Mishnah, upon their death, let us say they died, leaving no children. So then the issue of Yibum comes up. So the Gemara continues and says, Ochiv shel Rishon, the brother of the first man. Now the first man was a legitimate husband. He didn't do anything wrong per se by the fact that he went abroad and inaccurate information concerning his death came up. In the meantime, she married a second man, but that marriage is a non-marriage. She shouldn't have married. She's a married woman to the first man. So when upon their death, and they leave brothers, cholates the ochiv shel rishon cholates midoraisa. The need for chalitza there is a need on a Torah level. This was a legitimate husband that died leaving no children, so in order to release the widow from the Yibum binding, we expect chalitza to be done, and it's done. If it's done on a Torah level. The lo miyabe, the Mishnah taught there is chalitza but no yibum. That's mid'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan imposed a knas here, a restriction, a rabbinic restriction, not allowing her to marry the brother of her first husband. Ochiv shel sheni cholates mid'Rabbanan. The brother of the second husband, we can technically call him the second husband, non-husband. So chalitza is required on a rabbinic level. The rabbis, even though it's not a real marriage, and his death, leaving no children, is of no Torah consequence to the widow. She's not really a widow of his anyway. However, the rabbis want chalitza to be done, because in the minds of the public, people will think that the first husband actually divorced her and she was married to the second husband, and if they see her going free without chalitza, people will think that a Yevamos can marry outsiders without any formal release. So as to prevent that conclusion from being reached in the eyes of the public, we want chalitza to be done. However, the Mishnah says there's no yibum, v'lo miyabein, as far as the marriage to the brother of the second husband. That she doesn't marry him. Lo midoraisa, v'lo mid'Rabbanan, on neither level, not on a Torah level nor on a rabbinic level. simply stated, she was never married to him, and therefore there's no need for any marriage to his surviving brother. Rabbi Yossi Omer Ksubasa al Nichse Baila. There's a note that we have on the side where we, in effect, paraphrase the Mishnah on Pei Zayin Beis. At this point, one should be aware that there are three Tanoim that follow. You have Rabbi Yossi, who says a point, and then Rabbi Elazar, and then Rabbi Shimon. And we've noted their halachas on the side so that you don't have to turn back to Pei Zayin Beis. Rabbi Yossi says, Ksubaso al nichse bailo rishon, that she does receive a ksuba from the property of the first husband. Rabbi Elazar says, "Harishon zakai b'mitziyasu v'maisi yodel v'aforos nedera." According to Rabbi Elazar, the first husband is entitled to receive her found articles. If she finds things, he receives them, and income she produces, he should receive. And the first husband retains the rights to annul her vows. And Reb Shimon, also in this spirit of things of emphasis on first husband, he says that bi'asa o chalitzasa me'achiv shel rishon poteres sorasa. Upon the death of the first husband, if no children were produced, so all the laws of yibum are in place, and intimacy on the part of her with his surviving brother or chalitza will release any other co-wives that first husband may have had. Those are three halachas that we saw in the Mishnah, starting with Rabbi Yossi, followed by Rabbi Elazar, and who was followed then by Rabbi Shimon. The order is important as we go on in the Gemara. But before we do so, textually, let us glance under the Nosei Mivneh heading on the side. You'll notice a diamond. Take note of the fact that the diamond is, you see two kinds of diamonds, namely the tips are shaded in, but at opposite sides. And we also have a Roman numeral 1 and 2. This we highlight the names Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan in this Gemara, and we've noted on the side Shnei Gishois, two approaches, Lagabi Gimel Deis Tanoim Shuskru Mishnah, regarding the opinions of three Tanoim mentioned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Ha'im Basroi Modu LeKamoi, O Kamoi Modu LeBasroi. Do the earlier opinions, let's put it this way, do the Basroi, the later opinions, Rabbi Shimon is the latest of these opinions. Do the later opinions concede to the earlier opinions, or do we say that the earlier opinions will concede to that which was stated by the later opinions? That might sound a little bit superficial or even vague, but as we go through the Gemara, hopefully this will become clear. But in the meantime, you can see we've laid out the groundwork. We pointed out the structure of the Gemara, the two approaches, Rav Huna, and then later Rabbi Yochanan, and the issue concerns the order of the opinions and their respective halachas. Do the later ones accept that which the earlier ones say, or do we say that the earlier ones accept that which the later ones say? So now with that in mind, we go in the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna, Basroi modu lekamoi, kamoi lo modu lebasroi. Basroi means the later ones agree with the earlier ones. The earlier ones do not accept the opinions of the later ones. And this is spelled out by the Gemara. We underlined the key names. Rabbi Shimon, now Rabbi Shimon was the last in the list of halachas that were taught. Rabbi Shimon modu le Rebbe Elazar. Rabbi Shimon will accept Rebbe Elazar's teaching. Dema bia, de ikar isura, loy konis. We take a look at Rashi. Rashi across from here, a couple lines down. Bia de ikar isura lo konis. The Kotani. It was taught in the Mishnah that Bi'asa Koina Oisa Liftor Tzorasa. The act of intimacy, we say is the central problem, if you will. It's the most severe infraction that might be might be violated. And yet, Rabbi Shimon says that this woman is considered fully married, we'll say, to the first husband, so far as that when he dies, she can have intimacy in the context of yibum with his brother. So the bia, which is the ikr, the main problem, and yet Rabbi Shimon doesn't impose any restrictions regarding bia. He allows bia with the surviving brother of that first husband, and it's so effective in that it will release from any yibum bond. It will release any co-wives. So bia, which is the main problem area, and yet Rabbi Shimon does not view it with any sense of restriction. And all the more so the topic that Rebbe Elazar had spoken about, which are monetary matters, which are less severe. All the more so Rabbi Shimon can accept that which Rebbe Elazar says, that the first husband, who Rabbi Shimon already viewed as a real, full-fledged husband, without any restrictions, he will certainly be able to receive any lost articles or have annulment rights regarding her vows. So Reb Shimon will easily accept Reb Elazar. However, Reb Elazar lo modi leila Reb Shimon. Reb Elazar was an earlier, in terms of order of appearance in the Mishnah, he was before Rabbi Shimon. And in the diamond, Rav Huna had said that the later accept the earlier, but the earlier do not accept the later. Reb Elazar is earlier than Reb Shimon in the order of the presentation in the Mishnah, so he doesn't accept Rabbi Shimon. Mitziaso Maisya Deva the Mamona, who lost articles that the woman finds or income she produces, that's an area of financial concern. It's money matters. So there's no knas, there is no rabbinic intervention, no restriction on the first husband benefiting from those things. Aval bia the isura who, but when you're dealing with an act of intimacy, which is not it's not in the realm of finances, it's in the realm of isur. Isur is we'll call the other area of halacha outside of money matters. Literally, isur it has to do with that which is prohibited. Isur veheter, that which is permitted, outside the realm of monetary matters. A loose, maybe inaccurate translation would be areas of ritual law. Those areas are more severe, they're more restrictive. So that even though Rebbe Elazar shows some sign of, we'll say, leniency with regard to financial matters and their entitlement to the husband, when it comes to bia, which is the realm of isur, who konis, he imposes a restriction, and he will not allow bia yibum to take place between the woman and the surviving brother of that first husband. V'travayu modu le Rabbi Yossi. Rebbe Elazar and Reb Shimon, they were later opinions relative to Rabbi Yossi. They will accept Rabbi Yossi. Hani the yasva to say lo konis. The let's say matters concerned by that concerned Rebbe Elazar and Shimon were matters that apply to women that coexist with their husbands. The yasva to say sitting under him, living under him. So those things which are part of an ongoing marriage, they do not impose any restriction. V'kol shekein ksuba, all the more so the matters concerning ksuba de la mishkal umepak koi. Ksuba is paid upon the dissolution of the marriage, either through becoming a widow or being divorced, where they are separated from one another. So all the more so Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar, who regarding matters that that was part of the maintenance of a marriage, which you could say you saw the spirit of the Mishnah that this marriage, the marriage between her and the first husband is the continued marriage of that is not something that's viewed positively by all opinions. It's something that some opinions would prefer to see split apart, and yet they are willing to accept that first husband benefiting from these things. All the more so the ksuba payment, which is a payment made upon the dissolution of the marriage, the separation. All the more so, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar will accept Rabbi Yossi's opinion that the ksuba is paid from the property of the first husband. However, Rabbi Yossi lo modi lahu. Rabbi Yossi will not accept their opinion. Ksuba de la mishkalu meipaku. The ksuba, which is a payment upon her, is paid for her to take and leave. So, delo konis. It's regarding that there is no knas. However, avolhani diaspa to say, but the other matters. The matters dealt with by Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, which are matters that would maintain a marriage, that are part of a maintained marriage, that Rabbi Yossi is not interested in the first husband benefiting from. And now we approach Rabbi Yochanan, who will present an opposite approach of that taken by Rav Huna. The Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Kamoi Modu LeBasroi. The earlier opinions will accept the later opinions. Basroi lo Modu LeKamoi, but the latter ones will not accept the earlier ones. Rabbi Yossi Moidi Le Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yossi will accept that which Rabbi Elazar says. Ksuba Demididei Ledida Lo Konis. The ksuba which is paid from him, the man pays the woman, and we see no restriction. The kol shekain mitziyoso ma'isiodea, all the more so items that she finds or profit that she produces, the medidah ledidei, all the more so items that or matters that go from her to him. Just to add another level of understanding or explanation to that, Rabbi Yossi, who mentioned that she gets from him the ksuba, he didn't do anything wrong. She is the one that did something wrong. She married a second man. Okay, when the first husband comes back, so she's got to leave the second fellow, and yet we see that the first man is paying her a ksuba. The ksuba, she will receive a ksuba from him. When the Gemara said all the more so, things she finds, she is someone that did something wrong. So you have someone that did something wrong that is going to benefit from him. All the more so the husband, the first husband that did nothing wrong. All the more so he has rights to benefit from her. Rabbi Elazar, though, lo modile. Rabbi Elazar does not accept Rabbi Yossi. And here is an example of, as Rabbi Yochanan said, that the latter ones do not accept the early ones. Rabbi Elazar, who appeared later, he doesn't accept Rabbi Yossi. Mitziyasu ma'isiyodahu demididol ledidei lo konis. I understand that things that she produces, or the items she finds, or profit that she produces, that goes from her to him. Avok suba demididei ledida konis. But the ksuba which is paid by the first husband to her, that she should lose. She did something wrong. She married that second husband illegally. Utravaihu modu le Rabbi Shimon. Both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar will agree to Rabbi Shimon. Uma hani demei chayim lo kansi. The cases of Metzia and the Ksuba, those are matters that concern the husband while he is alive. And we see no restriction. Bia, the act of Yibum de la'achar misa, where the first husband is no longer around, lo kol shekain, certainly can be performed. So that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar, when he's alive, we still see these normal elements of marriage operating. So when he's dead and there's a question of Yibum, all the more so. Rabbi Shimon lo modi lahu. Rabbi Shimon, though, who said that the brother of the first husband functions in a Yibum capacity, he doesn't accept the teachings of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar. Bia hu de lachar misa lo konis. Bia, which is after the death of the first husband. So there, we don't impose any restrictions. Avol hani de mechayim, but the matters that concern the first husband, which we know that she's not allowed to go back to be married to the first husband. She's not allowed to go back to her family life with the first husband. So matters that concern the living individual, konis, there he imposes a restriction. The Gemara continues with a quote from the Mishnah im niseis shelo birshus. The Mishnah had mentioned that if she married without the rishus of Beis Din, but rather based on the testimony of two witnesses that said the husband was dead, she, upon the husband's return, she can go back to him. Now, we want to emphasize, and it's extremely important to emphasize this, that this section, this point in the Mishnah was taught by Rabbi Shimon. So when you look at the Mishnah, this was based on Pei Zayin Lebeis. Reb Shimon had said what we just quoted in the previous sugya, and then he goes on to say, and if she married the second husband without the ruling of Beis Din, but because two witnesses said that the first husband died, muteres lachzor lo. That is that's what Rabbi Shimon teaches in the Mishnah. So we have a halacha that, once again, if the woman's marriage to the second husband was as a result of the testimony of two witnesses, which we know is a very, very strong institution in halacha, there's nothing stronger than the testimony of two witnesses. So under those circumstances, she's considered anusa. These are circumstances that the circumstances that led to her husband, to the marriage of the second husband, were beyond her control. What more could she have done than rely on the testimony of two witnesses? So when the first husband comes back, she can go back to the first husband, because her behavior was an oinus, and an oinus, a woman who has intimacy under oinus circumstances beyond her control, does not render her forbidden to her first husband. Before we go on in the Gemara, we have a topic heading on the side under the nosei. We've noted Rav. Rav appears in a fire box. He's a central name for a long discussion in the Gemara. Rav Poisek Kamishnosenu. Rav issues a halachic ruling saying that we should follow our Mishnah. Be'oimro, through saying Hochi Hilchaso, he says that the halacha is like our Mishnah. Namely, Isha Sheniseis L'Sheni Al Pishnei Edim Muteres Lafsul Rishon. A woman who married a second man based on the testimony of two witnesses, she can go back to the first husband when he reappears. Bahim Sheikh, in the continuation of the Gemara later, Misoirer Tamias Rabbi Sheshes Midivrei Rav Nishma, in order to say from Rav Sheshes will be aroused to an exclamation, because from Rav it sounds sheyesh cholkim. When you say that the halacha is like such and such, that terminology indicates that someone holds otherwise, and it's necessary for me to state the halacha is like A as opposed to B. So from the terminology that Rav used, it seems that there's someone that would disagree with the teaching of Reb Shimon. Rav Shesh's feeling is that everyone agrees she can go back to the first husband. So the question that the Gemara will deal with is, why does Rav express himself in such a way that leads us to think that there are others that disagree? The Gemara. Omar Rav Huna Omar Rav Ochi Hilchasa. So Rav Huna quotes Rav saying that thusly is the halacha, that she can go back to the first husband. Omar Le Rav Nachman. And here we have a long question. Ganva Genuvi Lomalach. The terms Ganva Genuvi literally would mean something that's done through thievery. What is Rav Nachman's intention by something that was stolen over here is the Rav Nachman's claim that Rav Huna is saying something without giving accurate sources for what he's saying. So let's continue. If you hold like Rabbi Shimon, then Emo halacha Rabbi Shimon. Then say that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, the shmaitzech Rabbi Shimon Kozov, because your teaching is in effect following Rabbi Shimon. We pointed out before that when the Mishnah says Nisei Shelo Birshus Muteres Lachzor Lo, and then you come and say that's the halacha, why not say that's the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon? The Chitema, you might say what caused Rav to avoid saying that? You might say, Amino halacha Rabbi Shimon. If I would have said halacha balas Rabbi Shimon, mashma afilu b'kamaisa, it would imply that that Rav would accept Rabbi Shimon even in the earlier halacha, namely the halacha concerning the yibum, that the bia, the chalitza with the surviving brother is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of yibum, and it would exempt would free the co-wife from the yibum bond, and Rav doesn't accept that. So Rav could have said halacha Rabbi Shimon b'achrona. Why didn't Rav say it that way, that we follow Rabbi Shimon regarding his latter point, namely the heter of going back to the first husband? Kashya. So this remains a point of difficulty. Omar Rav Sheshis. Note that Rav Sheshis is going to raise his question. It's a long question. Omar Rav Sheshis, Amina kinayim v'shochiv Rav omro laha shmaitza. I figure that Rav was dozing off. Nayim v'shochiv means a little bit awake and a little bit of a slumber. That he was dozing off when he said what he did. Halacha michlal lepligi. The term that Rav used was, he said, hochi hilchasa. By saying it that way, you're implying that there are those that would argue on Reb Shimon in the case of the woman who married based on the who married the second maid based on the testimony of two witnesses. My havalola mevad. What could she have possibly done? She was relying on two witnesses. Manis ansa. She was an anusa. It was beyond her control. Namely, her marriage to the second husband was due to the testimony of two witnesses. What else could she have done? Again, the testimony of two witnesses is viewed with extreme seriousness in the eyes of halacha. It's a very strong source of reliability, a source of truth, possibly. So, when you're dealing with a woman who entered the marriage with a second husband under oines circumstances, of course, when the first husband goes back, she's entitled to return to him. And furthermore, we have a Tanaic source that will indicate that the Rabbanan agree with Rabbi Shimon. There's no machloikes. What does the source say? Kol arayas shomru ein srichos heimenu get. When you're dealing with forbidden relations, so the man and woman are to separate from one another, split up, and there's no need for a divorce document. Chutz mi eishes ish nises al pi bezdin, with the exception of a married woman marrying another man, which is an example of arayas, forbidden relations, who married the second man based on the court ruling, which for us means based on the testimony of one witness, where the court had sanctioned what he said and she relied on that. So there a divorce document is necessary. So we continue with an inference. Al pi bezdin hu de baya gita, al pi edim lo baya gita. Al pi edim means through the testimony of two witnesses, she doesn't need a get from that man, from the second husband. Her relations with him was under oinous circumstances, and of course she can go back to the first husband. Moni, who would author this source? The source, of course, with its inference. Ilemo Rabbi Shimon al pi bezdin mi bayo get. If we're taught according to Rabbi Shimon, a woman who married the second husband based on the testimony of a singular witness, does Rabbi Shimon expect a get from the second husband releasing her? Not at all. No get is required. And the Gemara points this out. V'hatanya, we have a source in which Rabbi Shimon will indicate that. Rabbi Shimon Omer Asu Bezdin B'Hora'asan Kizadoin Ish B'Isha. A marriage through the ruling of Bezdin, which is a ruling based on the testimony of a singular witness claiming the first husband died, that's viewed as Zodoin Ish B'Isha, a deliberate cohabitation between a man and a woman married to another man, an act of adultery. So that Rabbi Shimon views. So what happens in a case of adultery? So the woman leaves the first husband without the second husband, the adulterer. She leaves him without any need for a get. So Rabbi Shimon declares that the case of the Hiras Bezdin based on the Eid Echad is a total separation without any need for a get. Al pi Edim, a woman who married a second man based on the testimony of two witnesses, Kishigigas Ish B'Isha. That's viewed as an intimacy under mistaken circumstances, and she's allowed to go back to her first husband. So, as far as Rabbi Shimon is concerned, the Hiras, the woman who married a second man based on the testimony of one witness, so she becomes forbidden to her first husband. But what's important to note here that is Edi v'Edi lo baya get. Both cases, as far as Rabbi Shimon are concerned, do not require a divorce document. So we have both cases, according to Rabbi Shimon, don't need a divorce document. We had the source that's labeled above, source with the diamond number 1. In that source, there was an inference made, a distinction drawn between the Alpi Bezdin versus the Alpi Edom. In this source, you've got the Alpi Bezdin and the Alpi Edom with no distinction made. So it can't be so that the source number 1 cannot be in accordance with Rabbi Shimon. Elolav Rabbanon Hi. So rather, source which we labeled with diamond number 1, that source is authored by the Rabbanon. And it says in that source that if she married Al Pi Edom, if she married the second husband based on the testimony of two witnesses, she doesn't need a get from the second husband. She's an anusa. And as an anusa, she is allowed to go back to her first husband. And who's saying that? The Rabbanon. Not only Rabbi Shimon, the Rabbanan as well. So, and this brings us to the end of Rav Shesh's question. The point mentioned that if she's Nisei Shelo B'Rshus, she got married without Beis Din, but rather through the testimony of two witnesses, she can go back to her first husband. This is a universally accepted point. And hence there was no need for Rav to express himself using the term Hochi Hilchisa. That's Rav Shesh's question. Just to repeat the main nugget of the question, by saying Hochi Hilchasa, you're indicating that you're ruling like like A over B, or ruling like Mr. X over Mr. Y. But in this case, your ruling is something that's universally accepted. We continue in the Gemara. You'll notice that we have a marking scheme over here, and the triangles. The triangles that appear here are answers to express why there was a need for Rav to say Hochi Hilchasa. We see these triangles, by the way, they continue at the top of Omid Beis. The Gemara continues. Li'olam Rabbi Shimon He. The source that we labeled source number 1 is in fact not the Rabbanan. It is according to Rabbi Shimon. By having assumed, as Rav Sheshes did in his question, that source number 1 was according to the Rabbanan. So then the point mentioned there, the inference point that Al Pi Edim Lo Baya Get, and she's an Anusa, she could go back to her first husband, the assumption Rav Sheshes made that was authored by the Rabbanan, making that a universally accepted point. However, source number 1, according to this approach, triangle number 1, is not according to the Rabbanan. It is a source taught by Rabbi Shimon. Now, if it's taught by Rabbi Shimon, how can then there be a distinction between the two cases of Al Pi Beis Din versus Al Pi Edim? So the Gemara says, Utritz Hochi, and restate source number 2 thusly. And through restating source number 2, we will then be able to discover how source number 1 is according to Rabbi Shimon. What does it say? What's the restatement of source number 2? Rabbi Shimon Oimer, Asu Beis Din B'Hoira'asan Kikavonas Ish Be'isha Ubaya Get. The ruling of Beis Din allowing a woman, based on the testimony of one witness, to marry a second man is like a man and woman that got married intentionally. Kekavonas ish be'isha means is viewed as a regular marriage, and a regular marriage necessitates a get in order to disband it. The continuation of this of restated sources, Al Pi Edim, Kishelo Bekavonas Ish Be'isha, V'lo Baya Get. If a marriage to a second husband based on testimony of two witnesses saying that the first husband was dead, that's and then of course the first husband shows up, that is a non-marriage. It's like man and woman that experience intimacy without marital intentions, and no get is required. So that when we read source number 2, in which Rabbi Shimon appeared, source number 2 in fact then is not equating the two cases. Memela, therefore, source number 1, in which we made a distinction, again, non-equation of cases, is according to Rabbi Shimon and not according to the Rabbanan. And therefore, source number 1, which is only according to Rabbi Shimon, it's in effect a statement of Rabbi Shimon, it comes out then that only according to Rabbi Shimon do we see that a woman who married al pi edim is considered anusa and allowed to go back to her first husband. Well, that having been said, then that it's a Rabbi Shimon opinion, I need Rav to say that thusly is the halacha, because it's only a Rabbi Shimon opinion, not that which is universally accepted. We continue in the Gemara. Approach number 2. Rav Ashi Omar. Le'inyan Isura Katani Vehachi Ka'omar. Source number 2 in which Rabbi Shimon appeared is talking about the realm of Isur. If we look in Rashi, toward the end of the Rashi commentary, Le'inyan Isura, Uli oilam kidikosalka daitoch meikora. According to Rav Ashi, we are going to read the source as we originally understood it when Rav Sheshes was presenting his question, not as the first triangle did, which reread the source. Instead of kizodoin ish bisha, it had reread it as kikavonas ish bisha. No, Rav Ashi maintains the original presentation of Rabbi Shimon as Rav Sheshes stated, namely kizodoin ish biyeshes ish umihu linyan get lo komairi. However, regarding the need for a get, that wasn't the agenda of that source, the source that we labeled with the diamond number 2 above. The afagav de medami lo lezadain. Even though we are comparing the woman who remarried based on the Eid Echad to a willingful act of adultery, nevertheless, bio get. Whereas in a case of adultery, no get is required. In the case of the marriage to the second husband through the testimony of one witness, so there Rabbi Shimon will require a get. So now we read in the Gemara. We said Rav Ashi says Le'inyan Isura Katani V'Hachi Ka'omar. The source in which Rabbi Shimon's name appeared, which was featured as diamond number 2, is talking about the realm of prohibition. Asu Bezdin B'Hira'asan, a marriage to a second husband through upon relying on the testimony of one witness, is Kizadon Ish B'Isha Umitzura Abayla. She becomes forbidden to her first husband, just like an act of adultery is something that when a married woman has relations with another man, she becomes usher to her husband as well as to the paramour. So too in the case of the woman who married based on the testimony of one witness saying that the original husband was dead. She too is usher to her husband. However, a get will be required. Al pi edim, however, in contrast, you have a woman who married a second man on the testimony of 2 witnesses. Keshigigas ish be'isha v'lo mitzra abai. That's like an unwitting case of a man with married woman, which does not result in her being prohibited to her husband. So once again, as far as using source number 2 as Rav Sheshes did to show how source number 1 would have been authored by the Rabbanon and not by Rabbi Shimon, so Rav Ashi is undoing that. And therefore, source number 1 in which we drew the distinction, namely al pi bezdin, there is a get requirement, that in fact is a position taken by Rabbi Shimon, and hence it was necessary for Rav to say the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, because source number 1 did not reflect the opinion of the Rabbanan. We continue at the top of Omid Beis with a third approach. Ravina Omar Le'inyan Korban Katani V'hachi Ka'omar. The source that in which Rabbi Shimon appeared, that we labeled diamond number 2, is referring to the topic of sacrifices. And V'hachi Ka'omar Osu Bezdin B'hurason Kizadon Ish B'isha V'lo Masya Korban. Sacrifices are brought for atonement when sins are done in an unwitting fashion, not when they're done knowingly. So the approach of Rabbi Shimon to the woman who married a second man based on the testimony of one witness, which was a result, or through the based in accepting it, that's viewed in the eyes of halacha as a willing act of adultery, and there's no korban to be brought. However, alpi edim, if a woman married a second husband because 2 witnesses said that the fellow was dead, and then he shows up, keshigigas ish b'isha umasya korban, then it's viewed as a mistaken adulterous relationship, unwitting, and that is grounds for bringing a korban. So once again, the source in which Rabbi Shimon made mention of the based in versus the Edim, the distinction there was with regard to one case brings a sacrifice and the other case does not bring a sacrifice. However, to use that statement of Rabbi Shimon to conclude that both cases do not need a get, that is not true, and therefore, as we said before, source number 1 in which a distinction was made, Al Pi Basin requiring a get and Al Pi Edim not requiring a get, that in fact is something that Reb Shimon would say. And since it's only Rabbi Shimon, the comment made there that Al Pi Edim lo baya gita, because she's like an anusa and therefore mutter to go back to her first husband, that's something that Rabbi Shimon said. And because of that, it was important for Rav to say hachi hilchasa, to state the halachas like this over other opinions that would disagree. V'iboya sema, another approach, ha kamaisa rabonanhi. In fact, we're going to go back and say that the source that we indicated with diamond number 1 is authored by the Rabbanan. Utritz hachi, and restate it as follows. Now that source had said that kol harayos shomru ein tzrichas himenu get, and the continuation would be chutz me'eshes ish v'shenises al pi bezdin, with the exception of those cases that a get will be required. And the case of me'eshes ish, Rashi points out, that's the case where she remarried based on the testimony of 2 witnesses, as well as the case of the woman remarrying based on the testimony of 1 witness. In both cases, a get is required. And with that in mind, since a get is required, Rashi points out, a get from the first husband is also required. That shows us that she was in effect viewed as, let me just go restate that, a get is required not only from the first husband, from the second husband as well. So from the fact that the get was required from the second husband as well, that indicates to us that it's viewed by the Rabbanon as a serious type marriage, and therefore she will become usher to the first husband. And once again, I want to emphasize here, according to this rereading, even a case where she married based on the testimony of 2 witnesses, we don't say, according to the Rabbanan, it's viewed as simply as an act of oinus, but it's a real marriage. And as such, she needs a get from him, and she will then, a woman who was married by Mr. 1 and then married number 2, she can't go back to being with Mr. 1. So she's also on both. It's only Rabbi Shimon then that says Muteres Lachzor L'Rishon, and hence it was important for Rav to spell out Hachi Hilchasa. We continue with a very significant question in the Gemara. At this point, we can say that we had 4 answers, 4 approaches to, we'll say, deflect Rav Shesh's question of why was it necessary for Rav to say Hachi Hilchos. Rav Sheshes constructed his question based on certain assumptions regarding Bryce's Tanaic sources that we saw quoted in the Gemara. The 4 answers basically, let's say, reevaluated those assumptions, making it necessary for Rav to rule like Rabbi Shimon, like Rabbi Shimon's halacha. Here the Gemara raises a question based on, let's say, the svara that we mentioned earlier as to why is it that when she marries the second husband, based on the testimony of 2 witnesses, we allow her, we'll say Rabbi Shimon allows her to go back to the first husband. And what was the svara there? The svara was, my havelo lemevad. What else could she have done? Therefore, since she had nothing else that she could have done, we say it was an act of oines, something beyond her control. And when you have a married woman with another man under ones circumstances, we allow her to go back to her husband. On the side of the Gemara under our no sour topic heading, we're introducing the Gemara. Li'el omarnu dimniseis al pishnayim she'omru meis. If she got married based on the testimony of 2 witnesses that said the husband died, the chazar baila, and the husband came back, muteres lachzor lo, she can go back to the first husband, but taina demai havelo lemevad, with the claim, what else could she have done? We're going to see a series of diamonds, and under our Mivneh heading, this introduces a sidra. The diamonds represent a sidra, a series shel makoros, kushios, series of sources that actually are questions, shemalamdim lechora, that teach apparently the lo amrinon mai havelo lemevad. No, a whole list of situations where we don't introduce that claim, that explanation, that justification, namely of my havelo lemevad, but we do require something else. And if that be the case, if we are successful in deflecting or disarming this hezber of my havelo lemevad, then we'll be hard pressed to understand why is it that a woman who married based on the testimony of 2 witnesses, why would Shimon say she can go back to the first husband? So now the Gemara, Mosiv Ula, Mi Amrinon my havelo lemevad. Is that really a claim? Is that a justification? V'hatanan. We have a Tanaic source that deals with the writing of a get, of a divorce document. There are quite a few details in the writing of a divorce document, and if there is any deviation from the requirements, the document, the get, will be considered void, because ineffective. So this source mentions that when you write a get, you have to date it, and you date it according to a certain, let's say, starting point, a certain frame of reference. Often, the frame of reference was the year of that particular king's reign. Say that this get is being written in the 3rd year of so-and-so's reign. That would be just an example. So if you have a get that is, we'll say, misdated in those terms, kosav l'shein malchus sheina higenes, if a person wrote a divorce document that he should have been dating in terms of a Jewish king, and he wrote it in the name, he dated it in terms of the Roman Empire, or L'Shem Malchus Modai, L'Shem Malchus Yavon, or in the using the Median, the Mede monarchy, or the Greek monarchy, Levinyan Habayas, Lechurban Habayas, or the number of years since the building of the Holy Temple, or the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Hoya b'mizrach v'kosa b'marav, if he was located in the east and he indicates that he's writing this get while he's in the west, or b'marav v'kosa b'mizrach. Again, all of these are examples of inaccuracies. Teitzei mizeh umizeh. If she married a second husband with this type of divorce document, she must leave both. She's not allowed to be married to either men, not the first husband nor the second husband. V'chol hadrochim ho'elu ba, and all of the financial losses, etc., that were featured in our Mishnah apply to this woman. V'amai, why should this woman lose out so much? Leimo mai hava lo lemevad. Why not simply claim that she married the second man under onus circumstances? What else could she have done? She thought that it was a kosher divorce document. So, as such, why should she be penalized as so much? The Gemara answers that here you can't say my hablomaved. What could she have done? Because she had what to do and didn't do it. A bayalo la kruye legita. She should have read the divorce document certainly before marrying a second man. Rashi says la kruye legita lifnei chocham, in front of someone who's knowledgeable and would have pointed out the mistake in the divorce document. And since she didn't do that, she and went ahead and married a second man anyway, she deserves to lose everything that she does. That's not like the case of a woman who heard the testimony of two witnesses indicating that her husband was dead. What more could she have done, and hence married the second man? Omar Rav Simi Bar Ashi Toshma. We're introducing another source which will be a challenge to we'll say strengthen Ula's question. Hakone says Yevimto v'holcha sorasa v'nises. A man, a surviving brother, married his sister-in-law. Through that marriage, the dead brother who had other wives, the other co-wives, the Torah as they are known, she went and married someone else. She married Lashuk. That's V'hocha Tzorasa V'nisei. She married outside, which is standard procedure when Yibum is done with one of the widows. The other co-wives are released to marry whomever they want. So that's what happened. V'nimtzeis zu eilinus. And the Yevama, the one that was chosen to do Yibum, turned out to be an eilinus, a woman incapable of procreation. Teitzei mizeh umizeh. The tzora that married out in the meantime, she must leave her husband, and she cannot be with the Yavam either. And she loses out on all the benefits that we had indicated in our Mishnah. Now, the reason for the tzora having to be separated from her husband is simply she shouldn't have married out, because the mitzvah of Yibum has not been accomplished. And why is that? Because the Yevama, the widow that was married, turned out to be an eilinus, and an eilinus does not fulfill Yibum requirements. But now we ask, Ve'amai, why does the tzara who married Lashuk have to lose out? She has to leave the second husband, and she can't go to the Yavam and everything, and loses all the financial benefits. Why? Nemo my havelola. We ask, what could she have done? She saw one of the co-wives marrying the surviving brother. That was the green light for her to marry someone else. The Gemara answers, there was what for her to do. Ibaya lo limtuni. She should have waited. She shouldn't have, the co-wife, the tzora, shouldn't have married out. She should have waited to see if this Yevama is going to develop into an islandess or not. So there was something for her to do. And she didn't do it. She didn't wait. Therefore, she loses out. Not so in the case of our topic of the woman who married based on the testimony of two witnesses saying that her first husband was dead. Omar Abaye, Ta Shma. Again, a source that will call into question the excuse of my Havelolam Evad. Kol Arayas Shamru Potros Tzorosehem. This is, of course, from the beginning of our Masechta. If we just keep a simple illustration, because maybe it's been a long time since we've discussed this, you have Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and Reuven married Shimon's daughter. Reuven was married also to another wife. There were two wives. But Reuven died, leaving no children. The surviving brother is the father of one of Reuven's wives. She is an erva. She is a forbidden relationship. A father does not marry his daughter. As a result of the daughter being one of the Yevamos, the co-wife is exempted as well. Just like the daughter is exempted, the co-wife is as well. That's kol arayos. All forbidden relations exempt the co-wives. Holchut soros v'nisu. The co-wives, seeing that they're not bound at all, went ahead and married out. They married whoever they wanted. V'nimsu elu ailinus. And then it turned out that the tzora, using our example, Shimon's daughter that had been married to Reuven, turns out to be an ailinus. She develops physiologically in such a way that she's clearly not capable of reproduction, not maturing properly. She is an ailinus. Oh, so if she's an ailinus, the Mishnah says, Teitze mizeh mizeh, the tzoros in the meantime that had married out are to leave their husbands, and they do not. None of them will do yibum. V'chol hadrachim elu bo, and all the financial losses that we had seen in our Mishnah apply here as well. Now we have to add a little explanation, and that is when Shimon's daughter that was married to Reuven turns out to be an ailinus, we categorize that marriage as a mekach tos, as a marriage on mistaken grounds. A person, unless otherwise stated, a person expects to marry a woman that is not an ailinus, that's capable of procreation. So a man who marries a woman like that and it turns out that she's an ailinus is considered mekach tos, and therefore the daughter of Shimon, who is that, was never really married to Reuven, and the co-wives are not co-wives of an erva. And if they're not co-wives of an erva, they're simple widows of Reuven. They should have done yibum. Now, here in this case, we're describing the erva turning out to be an ailinus. Therefore, the co-wives shouldn't have married out. And it says in this source that they all lose out. When they do marry out, they have to leave their husbands, and they lose out on all their financial benefits. Why is that so? Couldn't you say here what we said with the case of the woman who married based on the testimony of two witnesses? What else could she have done? These tzoros married out thinking at the time that they were tzoros erva. Answer: Eboya law limtune. They should have waited. They shouldn't have married out so quickly. They should have waited to see, in our case, how Shimon's daughter, who is now a widow, how she would develop physiologically. Now they didn't wait. had they waited and seen that she's an islandess, they would have realized that they are still candidates for Yibum and should not have married out. So, in that case, it's not a situation of what could they have done. They could have done something and didn't do it. That's why they have to lose out. Omar Rava, Toshma. We cite a source involving the writing of a get. We're also going to make reference to a receipt. A receipt is something that a woman will give the husband that divorced her upon his paying her the ksuba. Kosav soifer get leish v'shover leisha. A scribe was preparing a divorce document for a man and a receipt for the wife. V'ta, a mistake happened. V'nosan get leisha v'shover leisha, and the scribe delivered the divorce document in an envelope to the woman and the receipt to the man. And then we'll say the day of divorce came about. V'nosnu zeh lozeh v'zeh lozeh, and the get was given by the woman to the man, which is something that Jewish law, of course, doesn't accept. So it was the woman giving a divorce document to the man, and the man was giving a receipt to the woman, which obviously makes no sense. The woman is the one who receives the payment, and therefore she gives a receipt to the man. So there was this switch around that took place, and then the woman went ahead and married another man, thinking that she was divorced. And after a while, it's discovered that the man is holding on to the get. In other words, the husband never did the act of giving a get to the wife. In fact, the scribe gave it to her. That's of no meaning. A husband has to give the divorce document to the wife. And that never happened. And the shover turned out to be in the possession of the woman. A shover is supposed to be in the hands of the husband. So it turns out that the woman was never divorced. Teitzei mizeh mizeh v'chol hadrochim ho'elu ba. Here's a woman that now has to leave her second husband and is also to the first husband, and all the losses that the Mishnah accounted for apply here as well. Ve'amai, why should she lose out so much? Neimo, why not say ma havelol, but what could she have done? She thought that she was receiving a divorce document from her husband, and a woman who gets divorced is certainly allowed to marry anyone she wants, and certainly not to suffer all of this loss. There is something she could have done and didn't do it. Ibaya law la kruye legita. Before marrying out, she should have read the document that she received from her husband. And had she done that, she would have seen that she's reading a receipt. She's not reading a divorce document. Namely, she never received a divorce. Now, she didn't do that. So she acted negligently, and therefore she loses out. Not so in the case of the woman who remarried based on the testimony of two witnesses. Omar Ravashi, Toshma. Again, we continue with divorce document issues. Shina Shmoi Ushma, Shem Iro v'Shem Ira. A scribe recorded the names of the couple inaccurately, changed the name of the man, changed the name of the woman, or the cities in which they live, which is information that's necessary to include in a divorce document, but it was recorded inaccurately. And then she went ahead, receiving this kind of document, this divorce document, and married out. She married someone else, but she's not considered divorced because of these inaccuracies. Teitzei mizeh mizeh v'chol hadrochim ho'elu ba. She is forbidden to remain with the second husband. She's not considered divorced. She can't go back to the first husband. And all of the losses that we've mentioned till now apply to this woman. V'amai, why should she lose out? Neimo ma'avelol meva. Why not use the same excuse? What else could she have done? Answer, not surprisingly, before marrying a second man, she should have read the document. She would have discovered that the name that appears in there is not her name, and she would thereby have realized that she's not divorced. But she didn't do so, so she was negligent. and therefore she deserves to lose out, as we explained. Omer Ravino Toshma. Let's try to show how the excuse of my havalol mevad is not a sufficient excuse from the following case. Konsa beget kereach. Now, the term get kereach is a reference to a very special kind of divorce document that was prepared improperly. There's something called a get mekusher. That involves a divorce document that the text is written on one side and witnesses sign on the opposite side. And the witness signing on the opposite side, line by line, must correspond to the writing of the text on the first side. If a line of witnesses is skipped, that is called a get kereach. It's an improper divorce document. Of course, the details of a get kereach are discussed extensively in Maseches Gittin. But a man married a woman based on her having received a get kereach. As we say, that's an inaccurate or an improper, ineffective get. Teitzei mizeh mizeh v'chulei. She leaves both husbands and must experience all of the loss mentioned. So, why should she lose out? You notice the Gemara here is quite terse, and just it leaves you to fill in the blanks. What you're supposed to ask? Well, why should she lose out? What else could she have done? And the Gemara answers, as we've answered before, Iboya law lekriya legita. She should have read the document. She should have noticed the fact that a line of witnesses signing was missing, but she didn't do that, and therefore there was what for her to do. Rav Papa sovar lemevad uvda b'mai havelo lemevad. Rav Papa encountered a situation of a woman who had married a second man based on the testimony of two witnesses, and the original husband came back. Rav Papa wanted to restore her to the first husband based on this claim of what else could she have done. She was an anusa. It was beyond her control. Amarle Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua Rav Papa. V'hatanya kol hani masnaisa. Rav Huna says, what about all the sources we got finished with? All these sources we introduced with diamonds above, and in all of those sources we have a woman which ostensibly what was there for her to do? My havalo lemevad, and we don't allow her to go back to the first husband. We said in each one of the cases, teitzei mizeh umizeh. She's not allowed to go back to the first husband. Even though in all those cases, ostensibly, what else could she have done? Omarle, Rav Papa says back to Rav Huna Rav Yeshua, V'lav shaninu. Didn't we answer all of those cases? Didn't we show how all of those were not situations that were beyond her control? That there was what for her to do? So that the fact that she's also to go back to the first husband in all of those cases, that's because she acted with a degree of negligence. Not so in the case that I am confronted with. Omar Lay. Rav Huna, Brave Yeshua, says back to Rav Papa, V'ashinuye leiku v'lismoch. And based on answers that we happen to give to forestall all of the questions that were raised, you think we're going to rely on our answers? Rashi, on the third line under the Gemara text, the second word on that line says Omar le bashnu lismo imzeh dochek umetaretz lidchois atshuva. If we through dochek is to push home a point, to force an answer, if you will. That's not an answer that we give doesn't necessarily totally dispel the question. Anan memeilo shaminon delo amrinon mai hava le lemevad. From the fact that the answers that we gave were called, we'll call them push-off answers, we see at the end of the day that we're not going to really rely on that claim of my havalol lemevad. In other words, in all the sources, there still was a possibility to claim, well, what could she have done? And still we saw that she was forbidden to go back to the first husband. Rashi adds, on the second line from the bottom, V'nimna v'lo avaduvda, and upon hearing Rav Huna Brevishur's objection, Rav Papa in fact did not allow the lady, in his case, to go back to the first husband. Now, we continue with the Gemara with a new point, a new topic. On the side of the Gemara, we record here Dino Shel Ravashi, which is L'kola lo chayshinon. A kol is what maybe loosely translated would be rumors or murmurings. Murmurings that the first husband is still alive. Again, a woman whose husband went abroad, and she was informed that he was dead, and she married a second man. If this is done in the context of murmurings that the husband is still alive, well, we're not going to pay credence to those murmurings. That's Rav Ashi's din. However, the Gemara has to clarify and qualify what is he talking about. The Gemara, Omar Rav Ashi, Ulakola loy chayshinon. We are not going to be choshesh for murmurings. Rashi says, second line from the bottom, Ulakola loy chayshinon, im niseis bebeizin v'achakal yotzeko shebalachai ulafanenu lo ba. If murmurings go out that the husband, after she married through a court approval, and then word went out that the first husband was still alive, but he didn't come to us, he didn't show up, so we don't take those murmurings into consideration. She would remain with the second husband. The Gemara continues, Hey, Kolam, when you say rumors or murmurings we don't pay attention to, which murmurings? If we're talking about a case like we just described, there are murmurings after she married. Ravashi already told us about that. Ravashi. We're now reading at the top of Tzadi Beis Amud Aleph. Kol kola de basar nisuin lo chayshinon. Murmurings that take place after a woman married, we don't heed them. Rashi explains at the top, Kol kola de basar nisuin kagon kohen shenasa isha. A kohen married a woman, grusha ozona, and then word went out after he married her that she was a divorcee or she was a zona, women that are ordinarily forbidden to kohanim. But it's after he married her, under thinking that everything was kosher. So murmurings that surface after marriage, we don't pay attention to that. So once Rav Ashi tells us that halacha, why does Rav Ashi have to say again over here l'kola lo chayshinon? The Gemara answers, Mahu detema hoyol v'asoi lebeidina v'sharinon la. The case that Rav Ashi was dealing with was a woman who heard that her husband was dead through the testimony of one witness, and she came to the court to establish that she is now free. What we see is, since there was this need to come to the court and make sure, we see that there was this suspicion in the back of our minds that the first husband was still alive. So she went to the court and got approval to marry. Kekola dekami nisuin domi v'titzar. maybe we should view this scenario as a murmuring before her marriage. And when the koil goes out, when murmurings start to surface even after she got married, but this was something that she entertained even before her marriage, that he might still be alive, maybe the murmurings under these circumstances should be reason for her to be usher to the second husband. Kamashmon, Rav Ashi is telling me, no. Let's go over Rashi on the second line from the top. Since she had to come to Beis Din to get permission to marry a second man, Alma bechai have misafkinon le'kodim nisuin. Therefore, you see that there was an element of doubt that maybe he was still alive even before she married the second man. The hilkach kemishi yotzakol me'oisishadami. Therefore, one might have thought that the murmurings that happened after she got married are like murmurings from before, and that would be reason for it to be usher to the second man. Chomash Malon. This is what Rav Ashi is telling us, that even under those circumstances, we don't forbid her to remain with the second husband.